Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Facebook Live with Dr. Seth Gillihan. My name is Kate Sample. I am a acquisitions editor and mental health clinician here with Pesci Publishing. And I'm super excited to have Dr. Gillihan with us today. He is a well-published best-selling author, trainer, clinician, and the author of our most recent project here in Pesci Publishing, which is his CBT Flip Chart. And we're really excited to dive in and talk a little bit about what the Flip Chart's all about and how it works. Seth, thank you so much for being here. Can you tell us a little bit about you and kind of how you got here with this project?
Sure. Yes. And thanks for being here with me, Kate. Thanks to everyone who's watching. So all my projects with Pesci have been efforts to make CBT just to make it more accessible to, the CBT decks are about bringing it into our daily lives with these really kind of bite-sized practices.
Yes, I have them here.
Yes, always good to have a copy close at hand. I've got one hiding behind the couch here that I can't quite reach. But yes, yeah. The nice thing is, the cards, they never have to be far from you. So the flip chart idea was really about making CBT more available to both therapists and to patients, to people who are either providing CBT or are on the receiving end of CBT. So I wanted to make it. What I love about a flip chart idea is that it's similar to a deck in a way, in that each page is kind of a self-contained lesson or concept or approach, and then there's, as we'll go through, I'll show that there's some neat aspects of having a flip chart, including the fact that there's a client-facing page and then a therapist-facing page, and we can take advantage of both of those and have information that's really a little different on each side and complementary, and I'm really happy with how it turned out.
Yeah, it turned out beautifully. I know it was a new product for us, and when I was thinking about jumping on with you today, I was thinking back to my clinical days, and I practice CBT in a lot of ways with a lot of kids, and I was thinking about all the different places where I drew the thoughts, feelings, behavior triangle, right? And so oftentimes when you're working with kids and adolescents, you're also mobile. So you have to get very creative about where you're going to do these. And I was thinking, I've done it on a whiteboard, I've done it on paper, I've done it with crayons, I've done it with chalk, all these different ways. And I was thinking, like, what a great idea to have a flip chart. And I actually found the page with that little triangle here. I'm sure you're going to show more, but
There it is.
you can use it, you can erase it, you can use it again, because it's just such a fundamental part of starting CBT with a client, excuse me, is so much of that psychoeducation and just, teaching so much of it. And so when this idea came through and we were working on it with you and developing this, I just thought this is going to be so useful for so many people, because CBT is so much education, and anytime you can have that visual is just so helpful. So I love that.
Yeah. And Kate, did you say that? Yeah. Did you say you worked with kids?
A lot of the time, yes. A little bit later with adults.
Yeah. And so, I designed this, primarily with adults in mind, because I mostly work with adults. But one of the nice things I'm hearing from therapists is how useful it is with kids, because the ideas are the same. It's as you said, it's the same, CBT triangle. And just like you, I've drawn this so many places, thoughts, feelings, actions. And I was actually thinking, a fairly standard feature in CBT therapist's office is a whiteboard, because we are diagramming these things out so often. And so this really is, it's literally a whiteboard. These pages, the front-facing pages, as you said, can be written on and erased and used over and over. But it does spare us some of that, kind of creating everything from scratch, and it allows us to focus more on just the really being there with the person as we're presenting these ideas. And you're talking about teaching too, and I think of this as both it's instructional within session, helping to convey the information as clearly and efficiently as possible and interactively. But also, I think for therapists who may not be as familiar with CBT, I think it's a great introduction because the client facing page, it's super simple. Everything is very streamlined: thoughts, feelings, actions. On the back, there's a black and white version for the therapist that really is an expanded, kind of amplified text for all for every one of these pages. So, like in this one, for example, it says at the heart of CBT is an understanding that thoughts, feelings, and actions are closely connected.
Right.
So that's that it can be a maybe a therapist's first encounter with CBT, or if they're getting ready for their session or even in session, it can be a quick kind of almost like a cheat sheet to look
Mm-hmm.
and there's something I'm supposed to say about this, but I don't remember exactly how I want to describe it. Oh, maybe it's worth saying that the arrows run in both directions, showing that each element affects the other two. So
Mm-hmm.
those little things are on the therapist page. And then also examples. So, I always like to have examples in mind, but sometimes, I'm not thinking of one, or maybe I always use the same example and I want a different one. So here, where there's a space for the client to fill in activating events with the therapist, on the back, there's an example. We see a big dog that's off leash. So that's the example. And then, for thoughts and feelings, there's, we think the dog is dangerous, so we feel afraid. So the thought leads to the feeling. For feelings lead to thoughts. We feel afraid, which makes us more likely to believe that the dog is dangerous. So the whole thing is fleshed out. So again, whether we're learning it or we just want to be confident in how we present it, uh, I like that there's this sort of, kind of like in presenter mode in PowerPoint. We can feel,
Yeah.
we can have the confidence of, there are my notes, but the audience doesn't have to see those.
Yeah, that's a great comparison. That's exactly what it is. You're privy to the notes and kind of the pointers to help you through, but you're not bogging the client down with all of that information, because visually, one of the things that I really love about how this turned out is how visually it's so appealing. It's so clean. It's very, your writing is always amazing, and it's just straight to the point, very core CBT work, based on your model, which I'd love to hear more about. And it's just not doesn't bog the client down with information, which I think is wonderful, and it provides a good visual to help remember some of the concepts and help them do their between session work.
Well, thank you for your kind words, Kate.
Of course.
And I was going to say this anyway, but I can return the favor for Pessy. I mean, as you said, this is their first flip chart, and I mean it's the high quality work that I've come to rely on as a publishing partner, because the colors are great. The illustrations I think turned out really well.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I was a little bit concerned about was, I mean, the production value would just have to be so high, and I know that's
Right.
that's partly in Pessy's hands, and choosing the partners that actually do the printing and the manufacturing. You never know for sure, and so if you're using an interactive tool and you're turning the page and it's like sometimes a spiral bound thing doesn't quite work, and you're kind of
Yes. Catches. Yeah.
catches, yes, and then you're like breaking, some of the spiral binding, or it's just frustrating, or if it's like falling over because the stand doesn't work. But it's all very simple, solid, and thankfully, the action is so nice. That was one of the first things I checked, and I was just like, that's so nice.
Yes.
Exactly what I was hoping for. And yes, the simplicity too. Wanting to keep this as streamlined as possible. And one of my really the person who taught me most about CBT was Rob DeRubis. He was one of my professors and committee members, dissertation committee members, when I was doing my doctoral training. And he emphasized I took his cognitive therapy practicum, and he often told us, if you can leave a client with one idea, one concept, then that's great. And our temptation, or our maybe our sense of obligation is I need to do more. I need to, give them, sort of load them up with lots of things.
Mm-hmm.
But we know just from our own experience and from, lots of research that the more information we have, the more we have to sift through, the more likely it is that we're not going to, do anything or remember anything. But if
Sure.
you give someone one, call to action or one idea, take this, work on it, come back next week, that's going to be much more effective. So that's really, simplicity is kind of the emphasis in all of my work. Maybe because my own mind, I think, tends to be somewhat simple in that way.
Sure.
Like I don't
Sure.
like a lot of extra words or overly complicated ideas. And so I distilled the mindfulness-centered cognitive behavioral therapy down to 3 words: think, act, be. And that's a lot of how this flip chart is organized. And a lot of my work now is really kind of built around that framework.
Yeah, say more about that. I mean, people who are familiar with CBT can probably, make the leap to understand where you're going with all of those. For people who aren't as familiar, can you say a little bit about that model? Because it's so, again, simple and succinct, but so powerful too.
Great. Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Mhm.
So it's well, yeah. Maybe I'll start
Sure.
at the beginning.
Sure.
A very
However,
good place to
whatever makes
start.
the most sense. Yep.
Yes. So when I'm introducing CBT, you know, I'll generally I'll talk about, there's cognitive approaches, there are behavioral approaches, and there are mindfulness based approaches. But most of us don't think in those terms for the most part. It's a lot of jargon. Psychologists in general, I think, love jargon.
Right.
Like to invent words for concepts that already had words.
Right.
Um, but but the cognitive part of CBT, I just abbreviate as think because we all can relate to that. We're using our minds. The
Mhm.
behavioral part I shorten to act because we're all I'm reversing my image here. It's like
Yeah.
trying to cut your own hair. So the act part that's behavior. That's choosing actions that help to move us toward our goals based on really well established principles of behavior and reward. And then B is short for mindfulness. So stepping out of that thinking and doing mode and just
Mhm.
entering into more a state of being present, being open. So I think those can be, they capture for me the heart of mindfulness centered CBT, but also I think they're really useful in the moment. Like if I'm struggling with something and I'm like, oh, like, maybe I'm feeling overwhelmed with anxiety or I'm feeling just really down. Then if it occurs to me, oh, there are strategies that I can use to try to manage this and to move through it, then I can go through each one of those. Think, okay, how can I use my mind here to uh, to move through this, or act? Is there something I can do that I've done in the past that helps me to reduce anxiety or manage stress, my mood?
Mhm.
And B, is there a meditation practice that would be helpful? Am I resisting my reality in a way that's contributing to
Mhm.
my whatever discomfort I'm feeling?
Mhm.
And so we can use those things. I like to use them as triggers in the moment to help to just jog my memory because when we're really
Yeah.
feeling overwhelmed and overtaxed, I think it's often hard to think about what's helpful for us. So the
Mhm.
simpler the reminder, I think the better.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that kind of lines up nicely with what you were saying. If you can, leave a client in a particular session with just one simple thing to think about, um, that kind of aligns with that because, teaching people about core beliefs or distorted thought patterns and things like that is super, super helpful, right? But to bring it when someone's in that point of distress, they're not always going to think like, okay, is my thinking distorted right now? Or what core belief is this triggering? Right. So, but they might start going with something a little more simple, which is like, okay, is the way that I'm thinking about this not helpful? Is there something I can do to make myself feel better? And I loved what you said about, am I not, I don't remember how you said it, but am I not accepting reality as it is? And do I need
Right.
to, am I resisting reality? I think is what you said. And that just to kind of bring that mindful piece in. I love that. Just keeps it very, very simple, and yet so true to CBT and that body of work.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and one thing I try to emphasize in my work is, I used to treat mindfulness as a kind of add-on to CBT.
Mhm.
Like there's cognitive approaches, there are behavioral approaches, and I know,
Mhm.
if a person needs it, we can also do some mindfulness-based approaches. I've really shifted to seeing mindfulness as the field within which we do our cognitive and behavioral approaches.
Mhm.
So if I'm doing a cognitive practice, it's going to be really helpful if I can start by being grounded, coming into the moment, um,
Yeah.
opening to reality as it is, because I can work much more effectively with the way things are when I'm open to accepting that this is how things are right now, even if
Yes.
I don't like it.
Yes.
And in a similar way, I think with our behavior, I mean, um, there are actions that I can take, but not really be present when I'm doing them. If maybe, maybe one
Mhm.
of my things I'm working on for, behavioral activation, this is a really fundamental part of CBT that's, super effective for um, treating depression in particular. I mean, by comparison, there are some medications that can be as effective as behavioral activation on
Mhm.
average. But in the long term, this tends to be the most robust and most uh, uh, enduring treatment. And so, if I'm doing something like spending more time with friends as part of my behavioral activation, because that's over time going to boost my mood, it's going to make a big difference, kind of the quality of presence that I bring to
Mhm.
that experience. So
Mhm.
if I'm with friends, but I'm just in my mind thinking, they don't really want to hang out with me, or I'm thinking about the mistakes I made at work that day, or just beating myself up, I'm not going to be getting the full benefit of that activity. And I'm also probably not going to be building my relationships as much as I could if I were really present and connecting and kind of offering people around me, my full and open-hearted presence. So I
Yeah.
think that the more we can integrate these things and treat them as really kind of different facets of a multifaceted practice, I think the more effective and helpful it's going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I think mindfulness is such a common term, and yet so largely misunderstood in so many ways. And I just love, again, I keep using the word succinct, just how succinctly you define it as just being present and being open-hearted and not having your mind be elsewhere, right? And not and engaging with the people who are around you. And yeah, I love that. So within the flip chart, I'm seeing in the comments here, there's people who are big fans of your work and love your decks. So they seem very excited about the prospect of a flip chart too. Are there some highlights of it or some favorite pages that you really like or something that you want to especially show off today so that people can get a good flavor of what this is all about?
Well, I appreciate those comments
Yeah.
and the question too. So yeah, there are a couple that I mean, a couple that I want to single out.
Yeah.
One is this. So this is within the B section of the chart. Um, so there are think, act, and be sections before we get to the applications part. So this is in the first half. We're introducing general concepts. So with meditation, I think there's often, maybe almost always, this idea that if I'm meditating right, I'm not losing my focus. And I really wanted to make that clear. That's not the deal. So what I've got here is, so we set an intention to focus. I have to get used to this. I can just look at the back. I don't have to flip around and look. All right,
Yeah.
so I set an intention to focus, right? I notice where the mind went, and then, whoops, I got to reverse this. I notice where the mind went. This is a camera issue, not a flip chart issue. Notice where the mind went, and then I'm going to lose focus. Like that is part of meditation. See, look, it's all in the frame. It's all part of the
Yes.
practice. And then when I notice that I've lost focus, then I just come right back, set that intention to focus, and then the cycle repeats. So I think what this makes clear is when you lose focus, it's not that you've stopped meditating. It's that's a part of the cycle, because it's from there that you're going to notice, oh, I was thinking about what I was going to make for dinner, or thinking about
Mhm.
something that that person said to me. All
Mhm.
right, now I'm right back. I set that intention to focus. And then um, I mean, there are additional unhelpful myths that I go through here. Like, I have to make my thoughts stop. There's one right way to meditate. I'm bad at meditating. That's a really common
Yes.
unhelpful myth. And the meditation is the only way to practice mindfulness. I mean, as I as I show in this other page, there, mindfulness in action is just as much a part of mindfulness practice as meditation. So just bringing um, patience, awareness, receptivity, and a sense of letting go to whatever we're doing.
Mhm.
And then one more, this is within the, so section 2, applying, think, act, be.
Mhm.
So I really like this first one, just stress management, because I found for myself that so much of the problems I was having with managing overwhelming stress were just that I wasn't recognizing it. I was so kind of in my head and not really aware of what was happening in my body or the stress that I was taking on, that I didn't notice the symptoms that I was having. So I've broken these out into mind symptoms, body and behavior symptoms, and emotions. So mind, things like my thoughts are cluttered, I'm feeling scattered, I'm distractible.
Mhm.
Others in our body, noticing muscle tension, poor sleep, digestive problems can be a big part of it. Drug and alcohol use. There was a time when I was definitely using alcohol as a way to manage stress
Right.
that wasn't helpful.
Mhm.
And then emotions, feeling discouraged, low enthusiasm, hopelessness. I was definitely um, reaching really a point of burnout before I realized, like, oh my goodness, I am just overloaded with stress. So I also just like this image. I think sort of
Yeah.
captures that feeling, that kind of tired and wired feeling, where I'm like, I'm so stressed and not sleeping well, but I have to keep going. So I'm drinking more coffee, and stress tends to have a self-perpetuating
Mhm.
effect, where the more stressed I am, then the more propelled I feel to just I have to take care of things and keep going, and can get
Yes.
more and more wound up. And so then I won't go through this one in detail, but just to let people know, we don't end with just identifying, yeah, here's your stress, here's what it looks like, but also there's a uh, whole page dedicated to stress management, to using the ACT principles,
Mhm.
principles, and think to manage our stress more effectively.
Yes. Yes. I love that. And I was just thinking too that if you wanted clients to take some of these home, you could very easily, um, copy them on a copy machine and have it as a handout as well. I mean, that would be simple enough if you wanted them to take those concepts home with them or take a picture of it or whatever they wanted to do. I love that. Before we go, we do have one quick question. So, what is the difference between the chart and your decks? If someone wanted to use the chart without a therapist, what would you recommend? So deck wise, what our viewer is referring to is Seth has a few therapeutic card decks with us that are based on CBT. There's these two that are wonderful. One's for clients and therapists, and one's for anxiety, rumination, and worry. And then his latest deck is the CBT deck for kids and teens, and he has a wonderful little co-author on this deck, his daughter Ada, which is wonderful. But so that's what this viewer is referring to, is what's the difference between this chart and your wonderful decks?
Yes, that's a great question, Jen. So I guess two main differences are the decks are just practices. There's no explanation, no narrative. I mean, there's a little introductory card, but really it's just, here's a practice. Next card, next practice. Whereas this is more of a teaching tool. I mean, as the cover says, it's a psychoeducational tool. It covers a broad range of things. It's broken into topics like post-traumatic stress, OCD, depression, and so forth. Um, in terms of whether this can be used without a therapist, it's a good question. I mean, it's really designed to be used with a therapist.
Mhm.
I think a person could use it with like could introduce their therapist to it. Could say, I have
Yeah.
this CBT deck. Is this something that we could use together in session? I
Mhm.
think that the some of the worksheets are really useful, like examining thoughts. There's a whole system here for testing out those thoughts and some guiding questions to evaluate and find some alternatives to our automatic unhelpful beliefs.
Mhm.
But I should say with all these things, I just take an evidence-based approach. It's based on data, and it may be that people find this is really useful just for themselves. And if that turns out to be the case, I mean, all the better. I think
Yeah.
everyone benefits if that turns out to be the way it is. So I'd be interested to hear what people's experience is like.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Seth, thank you so much for being here and everybody who jumped on to listen today. We are running a special for this deck right now at pesty.com. If you're using Flip20, excuse me, as a promo code, you can get 20% off and free shipping. And we'd love to have you jump on and put some reviews on Amazon and things like that so people can learn more about this deck. Thank you, Seth, so much for being here and sharing your work with us. And everybody have a great day. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Kate. This was great.
It's good to see you.